Buddy, welcome again to Niles First Christian Church, Disciples of Christ, and welcome to our Wednesday devotion. We have had the opportunity to move into the ordinary season that usually brings us into the summer season. You can see from our calendar, my liturgical calendar on the wall here, that we are just two spaces past the red dot, the dot that signifies that we have experienced Pentecost, that we have celebrated this year the opportunity of the Spirit come down. It makes sense then liturgically in the liturgical year that the next Sunday that follows is Trinity Sunday. That would have been just this past Sunday that we were able to gather together. It was kind of a difficult Sunday to cover everything because it was also, of course, Memorial Day. It was the anniversary of George Floyd's death, amongst other things. So we had a lot to cover on Sunday. And Trinity Sunday is always a difficult Sunday anyway because the Trinitarian doctrine is by far one of the most confusing doctrines, I think, in Christianity, especially considering how easy it is to deviate into heresy. It's really almost impossible. I think it really is impossible to use any type of physical implement to try and explain the Trinity. Even St. Patrick didn't get away with it, as using the shamrock is a form of modalism. There's no way that we can explain the Trinity by conventional or physical means. And I struggled with this for a long time because within the Christian Church, Disciples of Christ, there is no creed that suggests what it is that we have to believe to be a part of our movement, of our denomination, of the Christian Church, Disciples of Christ. It's up to you. To be able to develop and define your own theological thought about what it is you believe and why it is you believe it. So we have folks in our movement that are Trinitarians, we have folks in our movement that are Duotarians or Unitarians, and even as far back as Alexander Campbell, we had deviations and discussions about the nature of God as far as the Spirit and Christ is concerned. And we could spend a whole bunch of time talking about the nature of the Trinity and what we believe and why, but right now it would be a little bit too much of a monologue. So what I'll say instead is I always struggled with the doctrine of the Trinity. First of all, because it's just so difficult to understand, but I struggled with it because I thought that if I just read more, if I just studied more, it might be, if I could just gather more knowledge, I could figure it out. For me, growing up, knowledge was, well, it was an opportunity for power, right? That's what we're taught. G.I. Joe, after every episode, knowledge is power, which is something that goes back to Francis Bacon, or even in some form to Proverbs, that the nature of knowledge is power. The more knowledge you have, the more ability you have to affect the things around you. And I figured that if I just studied a little bit more, if I read a little bit more, if I tried to figure out what the Trinity was, that it was something that would become apparent to me. And while I have learned more about the nature of God, as far as God's self has been revealed to us, or as God has chosen to reveal God's self to us, reading a lot about what other people think of the Trinity has helped just as much. One of my favorite books when it comes to the Trinity is this really chewy book called The Trinity and the Kingdom by Jürgen Moltmann. It is a heavy-duty read. It's a lot of fun, though. And one of my favorite quotations that comes from this book and from Moltmann's attempting to define the Trinity, he says it this way. For the Greek philosophers and the fathers of the church, knowing meant something different. It meant knowing in wonder. By knowing or perceiving, one participates in the life of the other. Here, knowing does not transform the counterpart into the property of the knower. The knower does not appropriate what he knows. On the contrary, he is transformed through sympathy, becoming a participant in what he perceives. This challenged my very approach epistemologically to trying to understand the nature of the Trinity. And it challenged a lot of my worldview as to what the nature of knowledge was in the first place. It challenges that G.I. Joe sentimentality that knowledge is power. Instead, Jürgen might argue that knowledge is not power. Instead, it is relationship. And we see this laid out through God's revealing of God's self to humanity. Think about when God gave God's name to Moses. What we would call the Tetragrammaton, Yod He Vav He, what has been translated as Yahweh, or mistranslated as Jehovah. This name of God was given to humanity so that we might know God better. Not that we would have power over God, but that we might understand something about the nature of God. And indeed, even that Tetragrammaton and the phrasing of the way it can be translated, it says something about who God is to us, that we will know God by what God has been, or God is what God is. God has been what God is becoming. That we know God because we have seen God and will continue to experience God in our lives. So this knowledge of the name of God was not for the sake of power, but for the sake of relationship. We could think of it in the same way as when the first earth creature that was created from the earth, Adam, from Adamah, that this first earth creature and the naming of the animals was not so much that Adam would have power over the animals, but it's so that he would know them. And you see the same challenge from God afterwards, that our goal is to till and to keep this creation. We know the critters' names so that we can tend them. We know creation's workings so that we can help it function as God intends. Think about the reasons that we know each other's names. In someone giving us their name, they say something about who they are. They say something about their nature. And in hearing that name, we have the opportunity to know something more about them. It really is a reframing of what knowledge can be. And I think it is named readily and appropriately by Jürgen Moltmann, and we see the same thing developed in these creation stories. We need to reframe what knowledge is in a modern day situation. Think about it within the context of COVID, right? We thought that if we could just struggle to understand this virus, we would have power over it. But really, it has been more of a dance, if we're honest with ourselves, over this past year. In knowing more about the virus, we've learned we've learned a little bit more about ourselves and the ways that we know epistemologically the nature of virology or how we interact with each other, as this past year has shown us. We should consider knowledge in the same way that Moltmann considers knowledge, or the way that he names that the ancients, the Greek philosophers and the fathers of the church knew it, that knowing meant something different. It meant knowing in wonder. It was an opening of the all of creation, that we can understand it a little bit better, that we can move more appropriately with it, that we can dance with creation. Not that we can have control over it, not that we can have power over it, but that we can know in wonder. Knowledge is there for everyone. And the more that we know, the more that we can take care, more that we can steward this creation. So our knowledge of the nature of God, whether it's Trinitarianistic or otherwise, is to firm and strengthen relationship. Our quest for knowledge should be at its root for the opportunity to live peaceably with all. How good and pleasant it would be if we approach knowledge with this ideal in mind. So think about it. Next time you learn something, think about how it might make you a better person of faith. Think about how it might lead you to a more intimate relationship with God. Think about how it might lead you to know yourself and all of humanity a little better. It is relation. This is why we learn. Amen.